So on this channel, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the really valuable information that I got from the mind-body space and the practices that I've used and the great teachers that I've worked with. And I believe that this is a really important part of whatever chronic condition you are struggling with, but particularly with MCAS, because you may have actually been a medical mystery for a long period of time like myself, which means that you've been through some really difficult experiences, possibly in the medical world, even medical trauma, because I had lots and lots of investigative stuff done and I had lots of gaslighting by certain medical professionals. I had lots of conflicting information from consultants, one telling me this, one telling me something else. So really started to feel like I would never get better, and that no one seemed to really know what was wrong with me. And this, you feel your quality of life begin to shrink and you think, what is the point? And I think many of us really do start to visit, some really difficult thoughts. You know what I'm talking about when I say this, I'm sure. So mind-body practices are incredibly important because firstly, they don't cost anything. That is something that I really want to emphasize here, because if you're out there reading articles in forums, on websites, scouring for information, what you'll often see is solutions and protocols and programs offered that cost a large amount of money. And if your journey has been like mine, it's already cost huge amounts of money. And this could be in terms of, your inability to work and the money that you've spent on maybe private healthcare, private prescriptions, private testing, supplements. And often we're just kind of throwing money at this problem all the time because, generally the kind of usual routes haven't worked for us. So what is amazing about mind-body practices is it actually restores faith in your body, and it helps you to reconnect with your body, trust your body a little bit more, and understand that we have some very simple things that we can do that can really help with symptom alleviation. And even just by changing our perception of the symptom itself and the experience of it, we can begin to actually settle the nervous system, the immune system. We can bring down that kind of global reactivity. And even if we're having a flare, it could be resolved a bit quicker because of our perception of that situation. So I'm just going to outline the kind of key areas that really helped me. I was in some Facebook groups originally for reflux, because that was the kind of general kind of theory, was that I was suffering from chronic reflux, silent reflux, and a mixture of that plus SIBO and other stuff. But I wasn't responding to any treatments. And what's interesting is on tests, a lot of the tests were coming back negative, but they could see inflammation in the system and they could see my dental health was deteriorating. So everyone agreed something was happening, and it sounded a bit like these things. But obviously the medications, the supplements, the SIBO protocols, I did all of the antibiotics plus the herbs, several rounds, didn't seem to make a difference to my symptoms. So in one of the groups, I was signposted to the fact that this could be mind-body and stress-related, and I completely agreed with that. However, one of the things that kept me doubting this was I had stepped away from work, I had moved abroad, I had changed my life considerably and hadn't seen alleviation of the symptoms, especially the kind of the first symptoms that came, and the ones that probably frightened me the most, actually, which is really interesting because when I started to read up on mind-body illness, so this is where, our thoughts and our emotions and our beliefs are altering our immune system, our digestive function, our hormones. And there are lots of theories about how this happens, what's the mechanism, what's the biology that takes place. And I'll explain more about that in a second. But essentially just the main thing that was actually causing me stress was the illness. So it was kind of, I was doubting that this could help, because until the symptoms went away, I was not going to get rid of the stress, if that makes sense. I was really lucky in that I had a few false starts, I will say, with the mind-body space on YouTube, in that I think there are some people here that had some symptoms, resolved it with a little bit of journaling and a few other basic practices, but I don't think their symptoms were as kind of multi-system based and as long-standing as mine. So if I look back, I was falling into illness from early teens onwards, and often linked to gut or hormones or some kind of skin issue like dermatitis, acne, all these different things. So if you have long-standing health issues, but also I just want to kind of clarify, if you have a kind of strong history of adverse childhood experiences, so ACEs and trauma, then this can be a factor. So again, if you've just fallen into a bit of stress and got back pain, and it might be that some journaling and some understanding of this situation and maybe some letting go of the story of the symptoms works for you. But if this is a kind of deeper, longer standing issue, then actually mind-body practices are very valuable, but I think it's more helpful to work with teachers who have more experience around this kind of area of early life trauma, and then also the fact that this might be affecting many different systems, cardiovascular, so I would have palpitations and all sorts of strange, a little bit kind of going on with like balance, not too much with the dizziness, but definitely eyesight deterioration. So very scary symptoms that made me think, if this gets worse, I'm just going to end up essentially bedbound. That was like the story that my mind was kind of threatening me with at the time. So it's actually more helpful to work with, as I've said, practitioners that are a little bit more experienced in when there are lots of systems involved in your symptoms, and perhaps the level of illness that you're experiencing is causing a greater degree of anxiety. But as I've said, your history, if there's trauma, and maybe as well, one thing that became apparent to me is there was one single moment where my whole system kicked off. And it was because something that happened in my childhood kind of came back for a minute where, again, relating to a parent, I was like, oh goodness, if this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And I might be right back in that nightmare of my childhood. So there was a reminder there. And this is when the whole system, it's like someone just lit a torch to it and the inflammation went boom. But preceding that, I was working way too hard, taking on too much, exercising too much, and eating a really good diet, but also very kind of fiercely controlling of health. So kind of, I guess you could say, in that territory of orthorexia, in that I was like, I have to do this for safety, and I have to be this and do that and eat these things. The more I learned about nutrition, the more I was like, oh, I need all these things, and I need to make sure that everyone I love has all these things. So I was getting lost in fixing, controlling, and all of that all of the doing elements of health, and really bypassing what was happening for me in terms of what I was feeling, what was happening for me emotionally, what was going on in my life, and just my total stress load. I was just ignoring it and taking on more and more. And a lot of this is coping mechanisms and defenses against things that happen to us earlier in life. So we don't like feeling that, certain emotions, we don't like thinking about certain experiences, and we've become pros at achieving, maintaining, and controlling a sense of safety. And this information was really valuable to me, and I was like, that's why I'm a bit of a workaholic. I'm a bit of I get so fixated, and obviously we get so much positive validation for this. I get really into exercise, or I get really into knowing everything about nutrition, and I always want to kind of push myself in that sense. And I find, kind of kicking back, relaxing, a lot of the kind of, I'd see many Eastern medicine practitioners who'd say like yang energy is high, yin is non-existent. And I'd be like, that's not me. I don't do that. I don't need that. I really thought I didn't need it. So just kind of coming back to, again, as I stepped into the mind-body space, part of me knew that this stuff was a factor, but then, as I've said, part of me also was saying, yeah, but I can't change any of this until these symptoms go away, because I can't relax, I can't eat nutritional, can't have nutritional freedom. I'm scared of these symptoms. And the people that I worked with, I'm going to give a shout out to a few people now, but Sam Miller of The Great Allowing, Simona Owen of Turning Towards, and I also really liked Dare Response, and Michelle Kavanagh's work on, I remember just watching her talk about how we have a symptom and we just develop this very powerful story about this symptom, what it means. And when I worked with a few somatic practitioners originally, I didn't make much progress, but one thing they identified was every time I have a symptom, I blame myself. So this was just a really useful piece of information. Okay, I would defend that and say, yeah, but it's because I've eaten something, or I've not done this, or I've not done that, because I had a lot of health information locked in at that time. Whereas practitioners were actually saying, no, you're kind of really turning on yourself, and you're actually putting a lot of emotion and kind of strong, powerful kind of critical beliefs on yourself, even in the context of illness. When you've had a really difficult few years, you almost can't even see that at this point in time, other than to rant about it. So these practitioners that I've just mentioned, what they did for me, and I know this is it might seem like a big thing to take on at first, so I'm going to try and simplify it as much as possible, and I'm going to do shorter videos to explain each bit that gave me some degree of narrative integration to go, oh, okay, so now I can see how things that happened to me earlier in life led to these coping mechanisms, led to emotional repression, led to lots of illness because my system was on high alert all the time because it had to be, and now it's in a pattern. And the traits and kind of coping mechanisms that I developed were creating another stress load, and I couldn't let them go, even if I was tired or unwell, because they felt like a survival mechanism or a survival response. So like they were my safety. And so gradually understanding that kind of story of my life and how it was affecting my health was really valuable. But at some point you have to stop reading about all this stuff and do the practical elements of mind-body support. And what was really helpful for me was beginning to, first of all, understand emotions and the fact that we have these core emotions generated in the body as part of our survival response. So the main ones that we might be repressing, and these could be a factor in our illness, are sadness, anger, and fear. And this is kind of expanding on the work of John Sarno and his book, Mind-Body Prescription. You can also watch All the Rage, which is a film that was made about the links he made between repressed anger, and again, this could come from early life situations, especially maybe involving caregivers where we had an emotion towards them so fast because of something that happened, but then because we love them immensely, we would repress that and go into another, we might swap in a feeling, or we might swap in a kind of a rescue, or do something really fast. And then we might find coping mechanisms. So some of my clients landed in a little bit of trouble with food or alcohol and smoking, drugs. Some became workaholics, some became qualificationaholics, some, got just quite extreme about health and fitness, so all of these things, exercise and nutrition and getting a qualification can be done in a really healthy way, and they can be done in quite an extreme way that is trying to help us to escape from something and not feel something, and actually almost define ourselves and feel better about ourselves because we have suppressed our emotions. And emotions are a big part of our health. They're a part of our experience of life. If we're going to shut out sadness, anger, and fear, then often what you might find is that joy and excitement is repressed as well. So for some of my clients at perimenopause, menopause, not only do they have a lot of symptoms come in, they have many kind of mood states that are confusing them. They feel very flat, apathetic, they've lost drive, they've lost motivation, and they keep putting it down to hormones. But actually, I think perimenopause and menopause, this is my experience as well, all of this kind of happened to me at the age of 39. It can be, and one of the first things I was diagnosed with was early menopause. It can be that this midlife point is where we really need to pause and possibly process some things that happened in the first chapter of our life. And that's going to involve experiencing and processing and integrating our emotions around things that might have happened to us. So this education around emotions and how emotions are also working with your nervous system. So if we repress the emotion, and sometimes the nervous system might triage an emotion for later because it's kind of like, oh, that's not safe, we can't do that right now. But then the nervous system becomes much more sensitive, much more vigilant, and this is when we get symptoms. So the nervous system and the immune system are trying to protect us all the time. And one way that they do this is to have all the guards at the gates ready. And if you think about MCAS, it's the borders of the body that are just like ready for the fight. And that's why our soft tissue, our kind of mucous membranes are firing off inflammation. They're kind of overreactive because it's trying to protect us, because there's been some kind of signal that there's a great amount of threat, a great amount of danger. And that could have been building for a lot of your life, and you just haven't had the tools and knowledge and education to be able to as I've said, process events and experiences and be able to, reassure the nervous system and the immune system that we're safe. And this is what would really benefit you now, especially if you're diagnosed with MCAS. And it's not that we just sit there and go, I'm safe, or we do breath work or cold showers. We don't want to force this on our nervous system. We don't want to stress our physiology anymore necessarily. actually the kind of first part of it for me was beginning to start embodied practices. So this is things like yoga nidras, body scans, and just even dropping into my body when I had a symptom and just being with it. So just starting to actually reconnect body, mind and mind by moving my awareness into my body. So somatic, which you may have heard of, but that means body-based practices, became a big part of my first step into being able to kind of use these tools to, again, bring flares down and resolve flares a bit quicker, be in situations that would trigger a lot of anxiety and not get lost in that anxiety. So travel, for example, or, maybe there was at one point a big power cut here and all the supermarkets went down. I was like, oh my God, I won't be able to get my safe foods. Oh, what will happen? And so again, in that point, I had nothing but mind-body practices. So these tools become really powerful because we have them all the time with us. And as a result of this, I also learned meditation, but silent meditation. So I started off with guided meditations, somatic meditations, again, just all the time. As someone who liked to mobilize when I was stressed, I had to really learn to feel safe in stillness, feel safe in my body, feel safe with symptoms, and you can relabel a symptom as a sensation. So again, when we give it a word, you will have key symptoms that you really dislike. And again, the emotion you have towards your symptom is a clue towards a repressed emotion. That information was really valuable to me because I hated my symptoms. I was angry about them. But I was also very fearful of them as well, and where the symptom was going to take me in life. So it was kind of a mixture for me of anger and fear that I needed to start to work on in terms of the emotional processing piece. But it's just helpful to acknowledge how we're feeling about the symptom, but gradually we can create a bit more neutrality by simply calling it a sensation. So remove the story, remove the meaning. Remember, the mind is a meaning-making machine that this symptom means this, means this, means this. So again, if you've been in the trenches for a few years now, like I had, we have got really powerful, strong stories that we need to deconstruct a little bit. And as we begin to do that, as I've said, our immune system doesn't have to be so on high alert. Neither does the digestive system doesn't have to be like freezing constantly and kind of contracting, or the muscles aren't in a chronic state of tension, and we're not feeling that kind of, obviously this transfers over into the brain, and we get that kind of you can either go brain fog, or you could get into that like hypervigilant distracted mind. So as I've said, there can be key parts to this in that we can use adaptations to our nutrition and changes in our lifestyle and maybe medications and supplements to bring us to a place where we can understand this. But ultimately, the mind-body practices are going to be a big piece in whatever happens next. You're able to be with it, experience it, and also trust that you have some tools and trust your body again. So as I've said, just to summarize, the helpful things for me were understanding the kind of story, the experience of my kind of lived experience and how it was a factor. And remember that sometimes just going back there and looking at that story can actually create more distress, and we don't want to dig necessarily. We don't want to get lost that, oh, this happened and therefore this, and this is a result of these difficult experiences, and so therefore, well, I can't change that. We don't want any of that. For me, what was helpful was to understand. It gave me this sense of, that's why right now, even in ill health, I'm still struggling with my relationship with work, or I'm still struggling with rescuing people. Even though I'm really ill, I'm still trying to rescue people. So it really helped me understand myself a lot better, and these traits and this kind of persona and this strong identity that I'd created. And it also helped me to see why, my default responses to my symptoms, or my default responses to situations as well. Control, research, fix. Then the next piece was, okay, that's useful information, but what we really want to take away from that is the importance of emotions and beginning to process, possibly some suppressed emotions from the past, beginning to improve our tolerance to feel and be with emotions within the body and understand the difference between what the mind is saying, our secondary emotions, and our thoughts and beliefs, which are created by us. They're just a perception. They're not necessarily true. This is why we would often, we'll all disagree on certain things. It's our opinion. Whereas our emotion is true in terms of it's a gut feeling, it's a heartfelt sense, it's trying to protect us, and it is our guide. So as we bring these back online, it's really helpful. You can even start to look at it when it comes to your treatments. Do I think I need another SIBO test? Should I eliminate all these foods? Should I go and see this person? Like, we'll have a sense of what's going to move the needle and bring us to a place of wellness, even with symptoms and, chronic illness, and what's going to make us feel worse and more fearful and more threatened. So I really use this practice to think about interventions. And so again, it helped me to find the right doctors. I almost knew straight away, just from a few phone calls and inquiries, not the right person, not going to help. Actually, this person is listening to me. That was really important. They're listening to me. If I saw that somebody offered me I was offered a 20-minute appointment by an immunologist in London, and I knew a phone call, 20 minutes, we're not even going to touch the sides, and he's just going to throw a standard prescription at me. It was pretty obvious. Whereas when I actually did speak to someone, it was an hour appointment with lots of pre-consultation information exchanged, and this felt really good. I was like, okay, this person is listening, they want the right advice. I know this is a nutritional therapist. There's a certain amount of information we can get up front that can really be insightful. Even the words that I see on a client's questionnaire tell me a lot about where that individual is and what they're experiencing. This is a big part of your biology. So it's also really helpful to think about, our emotions are important. We may need to do some emotional processing. We definitely need to get used to feeling safe in our body, being connected to our body. So this is where you could just start with something as simple as yoga nidras, somatic meditations, guided meditations, just even moving awareness to your body and starting to be with a sensation rather than having that instant reaction of, oh, I can feel the symptom, I want to shut it down really quick, what have I done? And obviously going into that reactivity, just pushing up our anxiety level. And so finally, just linking it all together, understanding that your nervous system similarly is always looking around, am I safe? Am I in danger? So we want to be thinking about, we can't force the safety, but we can create, if you think about the nervous system as driving the car, or your gut, whichever way you want to look at this, they're in the driving seat and they are driving. And what we can do is we can wind down the window, we can change the temperature, we can put some nice music on. So we want to be thinking about the environment as a whole for our system. And that means that we can be with a sensation or a symptom and still feel safe. We can be out in nature, we can be in a supermarket, we can be in an office, and we can be with, I can feel this sensation arising. And, unless it's going into, as I've said, this is not necessarily if this is an allergic response. This is just if you're having a symptom begin to arise, or you're having a thought about a symptom, or a thought or belief about a situation that might lead to a symptom. And this is where we can start these practices of just dropping awareness into the body and just being with our sensory experience. So often I will kind of tune into nature. I will spend a lot more time in nature when I can feel I've got a lot of pressure at work at the moment, which means I need a few regular breaks just out on the doorstep, having a drink, just listening to the birds, connecting with nature. Might want to lie on the floor for a couple of minutes across the day, again, just to feel like I'm completely grounded and just let the floor hold me. And often then I will realize, oh gosh, I can feel some inflammation just kindling away. That's safe. I've had it for that long, it's safe. And so just using these very simple practices to cue safety to our system without forcing that process is really valuable. But as I've said, part of that is also allowing our emotions and feelings, and then we're allowing them in real time. So I might go out into a group situation and be in dialogue with people, and I'll notice my nervous system has shifted slightly, a bit more sensitive. It's tuning into all the other nervous systems, but I still can have some degree of agency over that process, because I can notice that my mind wants to do this, and my mind wants to say this, and my mind wants to mobilize, and very quickly fill gaps in the conversation, make sure everyone's okay, make sure everyone's having a good time. This is kind of me in a social situation. If I'm at someone's house, clear the pots, make sure I'm not seen with my feet up, so you can see the powerful conditioning that's playing out. And you can begin to just challenge it gently to some degree. Maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe I can just do this. Maybe I can just be safe here. Maybe I'm okay. Safety is there because we are the observer of this situation. We're observing the nervous system. We're observing the thought streams. We're observing the sensations. And we are the one that's in the background and just observing that process. And if we can come to this place of self, that was really helpful for me to understand, that just come back to pure awareness is one way of describing it, or self, higher self, and just be in this place, observing this and the stories, and this is how we can actually help the system to come down a few gears and without having to intervene and force that process. So I know that kind of went around the houses a little bit. I hope you found it useful, but I will just zoom in on each of the different details. So in terms of the emotional piece, the nervous system piece, the lived experience, a little bit more to help you understand some of these, how these mind-body elements can come together to really support your journey with MCAS. Whatever treatment or interventions you decide to have, these are going to be really valuable. And then also just in terms of what it looks like on a daily basis, so what tools you can use, I'll again just zone in on, this is the somatic practices that are helpful, these are the meditations, this is how you might want to journal. And I'll get my favorite teachers on this channel, interviewing them about the exact kind of ways to do this so that we don't end up in in a bit of a pickle, really, because it's easy once we start learning this information to maybe overwhelm ourselves and try to, I know some people that I've worked with want to go and just feel all the emotions and get that done, get that ticked off so that they can crack on with life. And as I said, there's often a kind of greater experience, a greater, we could say, lesson in illness and the experience and what the body is communicating to us about not going back to the life that you had and not repeating those patterns and identifying with those traits and those aspects of yourself that you feel are really important and define you. And actually, as I've said, breaking some of that stuff down and returning to the person who you were meant to be and you always were in the background. And that person has a lot more fun and creativity and joy in their life. I know personally, by the time I fell ill at 39, I was super serious, hardworking, an anxious mess. People called me the worrier. But you know what? Everyone came to me when they needed something, when they needed fixing and they needed information about nutrition or they had a diagnosis or this. And I was happy to dive in and just begin that furious process of like, yeah, I'll save you, don't worry. And of course, I was getting more and more stressed and overwhelmed with that, but also underneath it all, I noticed I was getting more irritated and angry because nobody was asking me how I was, and that was a situation that I had very much created because of the hyper independence that comes from your maybe difficult early years and your childhood experiences. So I hope that was useful. There was a lot there. Maybe listen back if you're kind of interested and it lands with you in some way. And of course, as I've said, I'll do shorter videos so you can actually dive into some of these areas in a little bit more detail. And of course, just fire me any questions if you have them.